Hey folks, this is The Well with Shan, and I am today in Durham, North Carolina with my good friend Evan Marbury. Evan is a pastor and a counselor and has just a rich wealth of experience with relatability to lots of topics that I want to share with you. He's a special person in our family life. Because about 8 years ago, he showed up as an RD on a campus that was right down from my office, and we became fast friends. And Katrina, his wife, came into the picture, and we started having birthday parties, dance parties, food parties, lots of fun times. One of my favorite memories is when we were going to a goodbye party for you and your family. And all five at the time, had a bonus son in the picture at that time, hopped in the car readily. It was probably the only event I did not have to drag them to the car because they all wanted to be part of telling you goodbye. And I always felt like that was a significant indication of your power in their life, their love for you, because they felt loved by you. So Evan, welcome, and just tell us a little bit about yourself and introduce the things I've left out.
Sure. Well, did a good job, and Shan is such a dear friend and a dear sister, and I'm husband to Katrina, father to Joel and Isaiah, and we've been in Durham, North Carolina for about 3 years. Before that was in Chattanooga, and that's where I got to cross paths with Shan and her family. And what has been such a blessing is I will always treasure that when we first moved to Chattanooga, Shan was one of the first people that we got to know, and was also one of the first people to invite us over to her house for food and games, and that kind of set the tone of our relationship that we wanted to know and be known by each other and our families. And Shan has been such a gift, not just in the high moments where we've had dance parties going into the wee hours of the night.
We like to dance.
We did. We love to dance and to sing. But even in the harder moments where I just really felt disoriented by the brokenness of this world and our own lives, Shan was a faithful presence. And so when the opportunity to help with this podcast came up, it was not even a consideration for me. I was so delighted to help in any way that I can, and so glad to have this conversation. And sorry in advance because we could go anywhere.
You just never know.
But Lord willing, it'll be good.
Yeah, I know it will. You have, you're very thoughtful. You have a very rich, you're a reader, and you have all this knowledge, but you have the heart of a counselor. And so, Evan, today we're going to actually be digging into the topic of shame. And for you Enneagram lovers, I have typed our brother Evan here. You're not supposed to do that, but I think we're both in the heart triad. And the shadow work of anybody in the heart triad is the lovely work of shame. And that's what we're going to be talking about. And I think we're both pretty familiar with it. But give us just a working definition, Evan, of shame, because you often hear this definition that guilt is feeling wrong or convicted about something you do. Shame is the feeling of unworthiness, that I am, not what I've done, but I am dirty, unworthy. So unpack that a little bit for us.
Yeah, I definitely have used that definition before of guilt as I've done something wrong, shame is I am something wrong. And I do resonate with that. I think it's really important to acknowledge. I think the Bible lays out that we all on some level wrestle with that. I think the notion of shame can be drawn all the way back to Adam and Eve, and this notion of being naked and unashamed. And after the fall, there's clearly some shame about being naked, that there's something about myself that I have to cover up because there's something attributed to me. And I often give the definition that shame is this attributive sense of wrongness. Like there is this clear sense of something is wrong. And I feel like that's part of what it means to be made in God's image, that there is some sense where we see where something is wrong. But where shame comes in is that we tag ourselves to it. We attribute that wrongness to ourselves, to the place where it's really hard to differentiate the something that is wrong and the person that is wrong. And so Dan Allender talks about what comes out of that then is is contempt. And the continuum of contempt is other-centered down to self-centered contempt. And those are actually always playing out with each other, that to the degree that you have this contempt for others, there's something in there about self-perception contempt that will, we'll maybe talk about a little later. But I appreciate one mentor said that when it comes to sin, we have to figure out a way to hate our sin without hating ourselves. And so, like you said, I'm a counselor, so a licensed therapist in the state of North Carolina. And in the counseling world, there's this sense of, unconditional positive regard. And the struggle is that we think there's something wrong and we shouldn't think there's something wrong. It's like there is some sense where there is something wrong in this world and we are a part of that.
Yes.
And we have to acknowledge that wrongness if we're ever actually going to pursue goodness. But the challenge of that is, like, how do we do that without also applying that to ourselves, and really hating what is wrong without hating ourselves? Because we are still made in the image of God, and there is dignity there, and we should own that, and that should actually propel us to differentiate from the things that are wrong. But that's really, really hard work, and I feel like that's the work of the Holy Spirit.
It really is, and that's what we're going to try to begin to parse apart in this next little bit. So there's already two things that you've said that I just want to make mention of as we dig. One is that we kind of have this notion that shame is something that we're supposed to rid ourselves of in order to become whole. But you just mentioned something there that's really powerful. Like, shame is, to some degree, a piece of living in a broken world and being broken. So it is a real problem when a person experiences no shame or no guilt, right? We might call them antisocial. Like, to not have a conscience is clearly a problem. So there is a portion of shame that helps us resonate with our humanity. So let's say that. And then this other piece of how it can be very difficult, especially in some Reformed circles, to talk about this concept of total depravity and to teach it in a way without the concept of dignity, as you just mentioned, can really throw some people that I have no inherent value whatsoever. Can you unpack that just a little bit more? I think that's important.
Yeah, I do think both of those need to be there. I mean, the term conscience, like in our world, again, in the counseling world, there's supposed to be this non-judgmental presence. Like, that's the refrain a lot of times. But then we have this notion of mental disorders. And to call something a disorder, it means that there is some kind of order that's out of whack. And so the big question just arises, what is that order? How do we understand it? How have we drawn a sense of purpose from it? How do we actualize it into the world? And for those who are Christian, the Bible is what helps orient what we understand to be order. And
our plumb line.
And shame is there, and it's used somewhat like nuclear energy. Like, you can use nuclear energy destructively or constructively, that it can power a city or it can demolish a city. And Jesus used shame in both of those ways. Like, I'd say that he shamed the Pharisees. Like, when you call somebody whitewashed tomb or hypocrite, I'd say he shamed the money changers.
Ooh, word right here, word. Ooh.
In the temple. I'm sure they didn't feel good when he was flipping over their tables like that. Like he wanted them to attribute some negative association with how they were living in the world. He's cracking whips and stuff. So shame is used, is there. But I think what orients how we understand shame is the gospel and where our hope is and where we draw our sense of self. And so there's various places, 1 Corinthians, it talks about God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. Paul said, I say this to your shame, 1 Corinthians 6:5. Ephesians 5:12, it is shameful to even speak of the things that some do in secret. Like there's shame all throughout Scripture, but then you also have these passages in like Hebrews 12:2, where the writer says, looking to Jesus, the founder and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame. Colossians 2:15, he disarmed the rulers and authorities and put them to open shame. So there's a shame that is utilized. The cross is utilizing shame.
Yes.
And how the cross is utilizing shame is putting it in its proper place. That if we are really trying to draw our sense of identity, our sense of self, or our sense of any of these things from anything other than the kingdom of God, your conscience should be pricked by that.
Yes.
You should feel wrong about that if your identity is in anything other than in Christ, and Christ wants you to know that. He wants you to feel that, because when we feel that, we respond. But all that being said, when we talk about total depravity, part of the total depravity issue is that we still wrestle with this notion of contempt, and so we give these appraisal on some sins worse than others, and we separate ourselves from others. We hide when we are called into community and be seen in the things that we should feel shame about, so that we can experience being stirred up towards good works and stirred up towards the affections of the Lord. And so shame makes things really complicated. We don't actually use it as we should, but I don't think that the call of the gospel is to not use it, period. And I think that's really hard to figure out what that line is, because
it is.
We are born into this notion. We're born kind of leaning towards this contempt continuum, and then you insert the gospel in that, and if it's not a gospel that is clearly from Scripture, it can really just be crushing.
It can. And Evan, all that you just shared is so powerful and so defining to begin to help us kind of parse out the broken or the dysfunction piece of shame versus there is a healthy use of shame that Christ himself uses. Now you've used the word contempt twice here. Give us just a quick working definition of what do you mean when you're using the word contempt?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when I think about contempt, I think about this, I want to use a word that still needs to be defined, like the sense of condemnation, this sense of a punitive posture, this maybe even retributive posture, that there's this emotional direction against, where you're wanting to dismantle or even destroy that. When I am struggling with self-contempt, there's a sense in which I'm punishing myself because of what I've done or because of how I understand myself. That when I think about myself in self-contempt, that self-thoughtfulness is just full of weaponization.
Yes.
That you should feel or you're not, and what's wrong with you, you're worthless, all that. But then there is other contempt, right? When you, and that's what I see. I mean, just go to the comment section on social media and you will see other-centered contempt where you are using this punitive posture and punitive language towards others. And I really feel like you pull back the layers of all of that, and you'll find shame. You'll find this sense of wrongness that is too often over-attributed either to other people or to ourselves. And so I think where I would, if to your question of the disconnect of the theology and applying it, I really feel like where the bridge is sitting long and sitting well with someone's story, and allowing it to get so deep to a place where if you inserted any truth, it's not really a hard fit. Like you're just seeing kind of like a puzzle piece, like you're seeing right where all of the crevices are, and you're seeing this puzzle piece on the table, and you're seeing this place where there needs to be some truth inserted. It's like, it's obvious this piece needs to go here, as opposed to like seeing all these holes, like, well, let me just slap something here and push it in there, it's got to fit. That can just feel very jarring at best, or harmful at worst. And so yeah, so I hope it's not sounding like I'm taking shots at Ed Welsh, or
Oh no, we have the highest esteem for him.
Yeah, absolutely, because I really do have the highest esteem. But and I'm sure he would, if someone came to him with that critique, he would explain all of that. There's only so much you can do in a book.
Oh yeah.
But I feel like that's where there could be some disconnect.
So when I hear you say that, it sounds like you're saying that shame is, I don't know if this is the right word, but best suited to be applied and worked on in the context of safety, in the context of trust, in the context of a relationship. Now, that's not to say that we can't be sitting Sunday morning in a sermon and the Holy Spirit do something, right? Like, I mean, he certainly does that. But because shame is in part a rejection and exposure kind of nuanced thing, exposure and rejection is something that can be treated, if you will, in the relationship context, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think of mentor Randy Neighbors that says like good preaching is preventative counseling. That if you preach faithfully about the biblical vision of marriage, that should create a sense of intervention about, okay, this is what it means to pursue a God-honoring, dignifying marriage. And so there is a sense where things should be addressed and can be addressed. And again, trust and safety, that can happen in a sermon, that can happen in a worship service in a small way, but certainly not to the extent of actual relationship and the time that it takes to build that level of trust, where people cannot explain away truth. That's what I often see when people really entrenched in shame, that there's this sense of exceptionalism about their brokenness, that everyone else can experience true redemption, everyone else can experience true recovery, everyone else can experience true love, but not me.
Because I'm more broken.
There's something about me that is more broken. Yeah. And you put words to that, and a rational person would say that that's not true, but that's the visceral experience that people have in shame, that there's something exceptional about my brokenness. And so they will sit in a service and they'll hear a sermon and they will nod in agreement that it is true, but there will be something lacking in terms of true heart penetration because they feel exceptionally broken. And it's relationship that actually disciples people out of that sense of exceptionalism.
So true. Love every bit of that. That's good stuff right there. Especially for the heart of a counselor, right? Now, I'd love to hear from your counseling and pastoring experience, what are the contexts that you see shame playing itself out? Because we all have these kind of preconceived notions of what shame looks like. But what are some of the instances or pictures of what you see shame looking like as it comes into your office?
Yeah, so I mean, because I'm a male counselor, usually males feel more comfortable coming to counseling with me, and men struggle with shame in the sense of feeling emotionally vulnerable. I do think we live in a culture where there's all kinds of thoughts and notions about masculinity, but what seems to still be prevailing is the sense that if you are a man's man, that somehow means that you do not have a range of emotions.
Yeah.
And so, as a man, it's okay to experience anger and happiness, but fear and sadness, those are things that you should be manning. You need to man up. And of course, we're human, and we have the full range of emotions that are human, and part of it is because we're made in the image of God. The Lord has quite a range of emotions, and we see that in Scripture.
Yes.
And so a lot of times there are things that are prevailing in men's lives, and it is there's just an emotional complexity there, and I deal a lot with men struggling with addictive behaviors. And so they come in, and of course, there's always some sense of confusion about their addiction, because in their right mind, they know that I should not continue in this behavior because it has all these negative consequences and negative impact on me. And yet it persists in the moments when they feel lonely, or the moments when they feel rejected, or the moments when they feel angry, all these things. They're trying to understand it, and they feel ashamed of themselves because they can't. And I think that extends out generally with my clients, that there's some experience that they're having, and in their quote unquote right mind, they know the right thing to do, the right thing to say, especially if they're Christian. But then there's this this reality that's like, am I a believer? Like, what is going on that I keep I stay in this cycle, in this ritual? And so I just see that a lot, and resonate with that deeply. And a lot of my initial sessions with them is giving them space to lay out the confusing mess that they're feeling, because they have been ashamed to even talk about the ambivalence, the strong desire for healthy living contrasted with these destructive decisions that seem to plague their lives consistently. Just laying that out before assigning any moral categories to it, but before saying whatever is wrong with how you're understanding it. Well, let's just take a moment to validate that that's what your experience is before we even hint at any kind of intervention or prevention. And it's astounding to me how few people actually get that kind of space. That it almost is this a huge intoxication of like, if there is something wrong that's laid out on the table, we instinctively want to move towards it to fix it with the best of intentions. But what I have found in a counseling relationship is it is such a balm and it's such a refreshing experience for my clients and folks that I pastor, if they just get to say it. But before there's any kind of corrective, is it okay for me to just say it and for it to just take up space in the room? To the degree that we allow people to just take up space with their heart complexities, I feel like that is the extent that shame, really, the volume of it really is turned down in those moments.
That is so beautiful. And as you're saying all of that and creating this space for safety for others to be validated, to be heard, I'm also thinking, what is it that is so driving in the person on the other side of the room that we do feel like we need to fix it, and just kind of those quick answers and getting down to the bottom line, and maybe some of that being driven by shame as well, or kind of the God complex that I'm the benefactor and I have the answers, and some control issues, you know, that need to kind of rush in and pretend that we could fix these things rather than that being the Spirit's work, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's a tension, right? Because I do feel like, especially for Christians, there's this this gospel call to, if lies are present, then we should give truth, and that it is actually harmful to persist in lies. And so with sincerity and care, I want to speak truth in love, Lord willing. And the best case scenario, that is actually the case. But what I also see in Scripture is that Jesus was the master question asker. That he did not always lead with some sermonizing. He did not always leave with, crushing some lie that someone was living in. The woman at the well, right?
Yes.
Like he led with an invitation, and he led with questions. Like there was just a thoughtful patience, and it was intentional. He was leading somewhere. And I think, for us, we got to be careful with that, of like these questions where like, I want you to arrive at this exact place, because people don't like feeling like that either, because that can feel manipulative. But there was a posture of let's take up some space here with what's going on in your heart, but before I do something. With the one with the issue of blood, he said, "Who touched me?" He knew who touched him.
Yes.
He knew, but he was trying to invite this woman out of her. She was hiding.
He was bringing her forth.
Yes,
Yeah.
he was bringing her forth. He said this publicly because that's the extent that he wanted to actually address the deeper issue. He didn't want to just address her body. He wanted to also address her self-perception, because she was hiding, got healed, and went back to hiding.
Yeah.
It's like, why are you still hiding if you are healed? If this thing that has pushed you into hiding, but the healing is one thing, but the healing of the heart and the mind and the experience of being shamed is a whole other thing. And Jesus wanted to call
that's
that
gonna
out.
preach right there. That will preach. Oh, I love that. And just the dignity that he gives. It's so beautiful. Woo, brings me to tears here.
The only time when he does a miracle, he says, "Daughter, your faith has made you well." Like he speaks over her an identifying statement. That's just so beautiful.
Blessing, and the depth and richness of that. Now, you've kind of given a mention towards secrets, but we certainly know that secrets is this residual place where shame can reside, and I often talk about it in the counseling room. Like, as a trauma specialist, I deal a lot with abuse stories, and I kind of give this metaphor of shame sometimes resides under rocks. Like, we're in this process of just turning over rocks and seeing what worms are underneath there, and kind of gently poking around people's stories. Sometimes I ask folks to actually say hard words, because just in the naming of a word can be so much shame. And you've talked about the addiction, and but let's talk a little bit more about secrets. I mean, there's the old euphemism out there, you're as sick as your secrets. What do you think that is?
I mean, with the notion of trauma, so I'm also a trauma professional and trained in trauma-informed counseling, and feel like if you're a counselor, you need to have some specialized training with trauma, because it's so rampant and just normative to our understanding. Anyway, and so it is fascinating to see the shame that people that experience, in particular abuse, right? Because not all trauma is abuse, but abuse is traumatic. And to see where people are coming in, just the resistance to name something that's just accurately abused, especially when a lot of my clients are men and they've been abused. Because when you are abused, there is this heap of shame on you in all kinds of ways. Some like, how could I let this happen to me? Or what does this say about me that this happened to me? And like all kinds of appraisals and interpretations, and the trauma, it sits with you the more you are isolated with that. Because like abuse, I'll talk about abuse specifically, because trauma seems like a wider net, but abuse, it is a type of alienation. It is a type of betrayal. The majority of people that are abused, they're abused by someone that they know. So it's most of the time not a stranger. And so there is a complexity to the relationship that you are supposed to be someone that I trust. And you have done this thing where if you were a trustworthy person, you would not have done it. How do I reconcile those two realities?
Yes.
Either I'm stupid for trusting you, or there's something about me that invited that, and this heaping of like self-blaming, and what I see is that just the relationship side, like shame has a relational component to it, that we feel the most ashamed when we are seen by others.
Yes.
So when we have these secrets, we keep these secrets because we don't want people to see us in them, because of the energy of having eyes on you in this very raw, vulnerable, painful thing in my life. And so again, this whole self-protection that happens, and so we keep a lot of secrets because we are not sure that someone can bear the weight of those secrets. And in one sense, there's some truth to that. Like the only person that can bear the full weight of all of us is Christ.
Yeah.
And yet we are created as relational beings. That isolation is counter to how we are designed. And even the world will acknowledge that, right? When you are in jail and you do something wrong in jail, they put you in isolation. Like the punishment is isolation. When you do something in society and you do something wrong, you commit a crime, they isolate you from society, put you in jail. Time out, right? So there's all these things of isolation that feel punitive because we know on some level, even if we don't articulate it, we are designed to be with others and be seen with others. And it can be very confusing because instinctively we want to separate when we feel this pain or this sense of shame and vulnerability. And that's where counseling is really important. Being in safe community is really important because it draws you back in. It draws you back in such a way that you can acknowledge, I don't actually have the strength within myself to move forward well. In myself, I feel this instinct, a pull away. And Christ invites us. Our community invites us. At least we should feel this pull in, because at our best selves we make the conscious and healthy decision to be in community and to be seen and to not isolate. But we're not always in our best selves. There are moments when the brokenness of this world gets to us. Our sin arises. Temptation feels heavy, and those proclivities, prone to wander. Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love.
Yes.
And so, yes, the Lord intervenes in that, but he also uses his people. He uses his church to experience this knownness, this seenness. And so, yes, secrets are natural. And I imagine even someone listening to this, they might feel ashamed that they have this secret that they have never talked about and feel like there's something wrong with them because of that. But just want to affirm that is natural. We do all have that. We're all wrestling with how can I feel safe enough to invite someone into this. But if we are doing that kind of calibration on our own, we will always come on the other side saying there's more reason to hide than to be exposed because of this contempt continuum. And so we need to find just a relationship that is worth risking. That is worth risking to say, I'm going to choose to believe that if I reveal myself to you, that you will not reject me. That's a huge risk for someone that deals deeply with shame. But I do feel like that's the gospel call.
It is.
I do feel like, I think that was the gospel call with Jesus. Like Jesus invited people to risk being seen by him. And I don't think he ever minimized that risk. I think he was so patient and gentle because he knew how risky it was for a sinner to allow themselves to be exposed in this world. So Christ have mercy that we are ambassadors to that end.
And this is taking me on a little bit of a different thought, just kind of sociologically among the generations, because I'm seeing this new generation coming up where, now I'm making a broad generalization. Let me preface it by that. But there are places where folks go on public sites and they all cite their story and they all confirm and validate. It's a safe place, if you will, to publicly tell your abuse story, or maybe even with racial tension. There's these sites where you go and you share your racial abuse or things like that. And then you have the older generation where that kind of stuff is very foreign. It feels almost foolish, but are a little more truth seeking or factual. It's a more principled morality kind of approach, and you just see this vacillation between the generations, if you will. When in reality, it's one of those things where both are actually needed, right? You have to hold those two things that seem so polar in tension together. Can you unpack that just a minute for us?
Just a minute.
Just a minute, Evan.
Oh gosh. What came to mind is I heard you talking about that, because I see that as well. These different almost extremes of like what is authenticity, and the word discretion comes to mind. I say that for younger generations, like discretion feels like repression, for older generations, discretion just feels like just good sense, and a good sense of like you gotta be able to be thoughtful and strategic, but inadvertently trying to be strategic, you actually end up not having very many relationships where there's actual vulnerability.
There. You just don't see that much vulnerability in the older generation. It's true.
And younger generations see older generation, and it just feels like such a different world, because it seems like there's such a simplicity to the struggle, a seeming simplicity to the struggle. Older people just did not struggle in the ways of complexity as younger generations. And certainly it can present that way because of these differing views on discretion and what that means, what that should mean. And social media has created a fever pitch around how do we gain acceptance and approval. And I do think that social media is used too often as a therapeutic outlet. And it is therapeutic, but it's not therapy.
Right.
I do think there is something cathartic about sharing your story, and then the comment section is filled with people that are affirming or saying me too, or all these kinds of things. But what I have also seen is that when people have put themselves out there to that degree, if they get 100 positive comments and then one comment that says you're an idiot for doing this, what's wrong with you, and yada yada yada, that it will crush people. That one comment it will send them spiraling. Or someone puts a post out there and they are anxious all day because they have not gotten as many likes to their post as they feel like they should have. Like, am I being weird? Should I delete it? Should I take it down? And just seeing, people have come into my office with these kinds of things. And so there's a shadow side to this therapeutic tool of social media, where I do feel like people are experiencing some level of acceptance, and especially with some of these other struggles that people are having. But I don't think there's enough understanding of the negative consequences of trying to gain acceptance in that way. You're not actually getting the depth of connection. You might get the breadth of connection. You might get connection that is far-reaching. But the depth of it and the rootedness of connection, social media or blogs or kind of this internet age, it will not provide that. And it's not even moralizing. Like the statistics bear that out. Research bears that out.
That's right.
Like we cannot rely on the internet to be our place of connection. But we still try to with the heart of hearts. And when we see that it's not working, we'll just invent a whole new social media platform, and maybe that will get it to us. But it won't. At some point, we have to acknowledge it won't do that, and we have to pivot. But the younger generation does not want to pivot to what the older generation has done.
Because in some ways, reacting from it.
There's some reactionary things to that. So there's this weird sense of confusion. That's like, I don't want to be what the older generation has done. And this feels very distinct from the older generation, but it's not actually accomplishing what I set out to do. So what then? And I actually think that's a good place for some gospel ministry. Ooh. I really feel that's a good place. I really feel like where we're headed in terms of apologetics, I feel like mental health is it's going to be a prominent vein of apologetics. It's an
intersection, don't you think?
Yeah,
of
absolutely.
All this. I agree with
absolutely.
you. I mean, we're in a prime cultural moment for mental health to be really a conduit toward the gospel.
Oh yeah, and identity and what it means for human flourishing, those are such good questions to ask. And this younger generation is asking it so clearly, so tangibly. What is my identity? What can I cling to and trust that it'll provide for me this sense of identity that I'm longing for? That is such a good question, and you are not unique in asking that question. But what you're clinging to is not actually going to give you what you think it will. And I feel like we are getting to the place where it's becoming more obvious. Not yet, but Lord willing, it becomes obvious, like, this actually isn't giving it to me. Social media is not giving it to me. The sexual ideology stuff isn't getting to me. These platformings is getting, it's not my job, my money. Like 2020 showed that we really can't rely on a whole lot. My physical health is not really giving it to me. And so what can I really rely on to prop me up? That is such a good question, and Jesus answers that far better than anyone or anything else.
Another preaching moment, Evan Marbury. That's so rich, so rich. Yeah. I want to chat just a little moment here as we're kind of moving toward wrapping up, and is it Brene Brown that just had a recent release on the gift of imperfection, I believe. And of course she's an incredible shame researcher. And our dear friend Kelly Kapic is just coming out with a book called
shout out Kelly Kapic.
Woo, Kelly! Let's see, that You're Only Human, I believe, is the name of it, because there can be a culture within Christian circles where the intersection of middle class, success, being driven, being ambitious, wanting to do things right, can all kind of intersect with a cultural norm of pretty darn high pressure. And it kind of takes on its own Christianized thing, and so let's talk a little bit about the shame involved in imperfection. I can't quite get it right. It kind of has that perfectionistic undertone. But I think there's a lot of folks in our circles who really wrestle with it. I would say you and I wrestle with this. So I resonate with it deeply, especially in the context of parenting. I mean, that's been the place where it's been most difficult. Like, dang it, I just can't get this right. And it's not only the pain of imperfection, it's the impact of the development of my kids, which bears another layer of pain. But whatever context you're in, I think we wrestle with that. Can you speak to some of that for a moment?
That's so Wow, that's so powerful, and I can't wait to read Dr. Kefig's book.
Oh, yeah.
Shout out to Kelly. I do think without the gospel, it is a crushing weight to be confronted by our imperfection. It is a crushing weight because I think we can see the negative impact that we can have on the world, the negative impact to ourselves, if we're being honest. That it can be easy to talk about imperfection as though like just living your authentic self and yada yada yada. But part of the natural consequence of imperfection is that there's some moral imperfection, there's some physical imperfection, and we want to glean a sense of acceptance and approval by what we can achieve, by how we can present ourselves in healthy ways, and all these things. And so when we fall short, like that is really hard. We want to believe that we can embody our ideals.
Yeah.
And when we are confronted with the absolutely true fact that we cannot embody our ideals, the big question is, how then do I live? If I know that I can't really embody my ideals. And I think, again, the scriptures are very helpful, and the gospel is very helpful in that way. And I mean, us talking about shame, like I wish I could talk about shame for myself in these like triumphalistic terms, and it's like kind of testimonial about how I've overcome shame. But the reality is, the longer I live and the more I learn learn the gospel, the more I see how far shame has and is reaching in my life.
Yes.
It's just everywhere, and I feel it constantly. And even when having some perception of success, a lot of times my shame has fueled that, and then being confronted by that, it's hard not to then spiral into shame of like, this is why I'm doing this. I thought this was, all these kinds of things. And so I'm speaking to myself as much as I'm speaking to anyone on this podcast. But what I love about the gospel is that if I really believe the gospel, where Romans 10 says, all those who believe will not be put to shame. Like if I really believe that means then that not only can I be honest about the imperfections that I feel intuitively, that I can actually be even more honest about my imperfections. That, as Paul says, I can boast in my weakness. We have in our culture, in this cultural moment, this sense of boasting in our weakness. But it's kind of like trying to flip it on its head. Like I'm boasting my weakness in a way, but I'm still trying to gain approval and acceptance and a sense of identity. I'm just doing it in this kind of boastful and weakness way, but it's still self-gratifying. But when Paul boasts about his weakness, he's doing that because he really wants to showcase Christ, and he really wants to showcase where everything else is sinking sand. I know that I can stand on Christ.
Oh my!
And all these other
things,
all these other things. Like if I don't boast in how all these other things are lesser, I might make the mistake of trying to stand on them.
Yes.
And so I boast in the deficiency of all these things, so that I can really showcase the sufficiency and supremacy of Christ. And yes, gift of imperfection. I've been, completely, I just blessed by Brene Brown's stuff, and would recommend her materials in a lot of ways. But I would recommend it as, it's not something that's wrong, but something that's like a comma. Like she doesn't complete the thought in how we're supposed to utilize our vulnerability. That it's not some turn it on its head kind of way of again this positive self-regard. But it is the invitation at the end of vulnerability is that I actually lay down my life.
Wow.
And that I decrease, and that Christ increases within me, that I no longer live, but it is Christ in me. That's where you complete the thought. Anything less than that, you will inevitably still be grasping onto these notions of idyllic living, and you will fall short, and there will be some other kind of shame dynamic that will take its place. It will be a never-ending battle with shame if you don't at some point let go of self and cling to Christ. That has to be inserted at some point in the conversation. And I feel that so heavily. I feel that every time I try to use some kind of these tools that are good, like groundedness,
right,
and the mindfulness,
right,
like all those things are good,
yes,
and there's nothing wrong with them. They're a comma
that's right,
to a much longer sentence, and we have to complete the thought of what's really the benefit of all of that. We don't want just symptom reduction. We actually want transformation of our hearts to find our identity in someone who is much greater than anything we can find in this world. And I forget that.
With your truth,